It's the first podcast of the new year, and we're kicking it off with an inspirational story as we talk to the first person to ever swim the entire length of the Connecticut River, and it's longer than you think. Plus, we take a look at other stories making the headlines from around the region. This is Connecticut East This Week. Hello, I'm Brian Scott Smith. Happy New Year to you from the first Connecticut East This Week podcast of 2025. It's that time where we make our New Year's resolutions and promise to eat healthier, do more physical activity, and maybe visit friends and family more and possibly travel. But we're not going to talk about any of that. Instead, we're going to revisit one woman's incredible journey. Back in October of 2023, Kari Kastango became the first person ever to swim the entire length of the Connecticut River. She isn't a trained athlete or professional swimmer, but a person with a love for the water and her environment. Since completing the swim, Kari gives talks about it and during the journey became a member of the Connecticut River Conservancy. I sat down with Kari recently to find out more about her incredible journey. Kari, thanks ever so much for joining us. It's great to have you on the podcast.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Brian.
So we should point out that when you did this, it took you 5 years to swim 410 miles. And we'll explain that to people because I didn't realize how long the Connecticut River was either. And also we're going to talk about obviously the support and the journey behind this, why you decided to do this. Which really, I suppose, is the first question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You said you didn't know it was 410 miles either. You find out it is. So why did you still want to swim the entire length of the Connecticut River?
Just for a love of water. And I was bored swimming, doing flip turns at the local YMCA. Great facility, great people, but I grew up swimming outdoors and it's my preferred venue. And the Connecticut River literally was about 200 yards as the crow flies from my home. River accessibility was an issue initially, but after being bored, I got over that and found my way into the river. And after swimming 24 miles over multiple swims over 2 summers, I decided to do the entire thing.
So you find out that it's actually 410 miles, which I think, if I read correctly, was like double what you thought it was originally.
Yes.
So tell us where it all starts, because a lot of people will think, oh, it's Connecticut River, it's just Connecticut. Of course it isn't. Where does this river actually start?
This river starts a few hundred yards from the Canadian border up in the Pittsburgh, New Hampshire area. And then it begins in a small marshy, swampy area, and that's called the Fourth Connecticut Lake. Trickles down to the Third Connecticut Lake. Trickles down to the second, to the first, Lake Francis. So between Lake Francis and Colebrook, it's quite rocky. So while I didn't actually swim that for safety reasons, I did bike that distance. The other thing that I did was that I wore 7 coins around my neck because they helped motivate me, because I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to hold these 7 coins and know that they traverse the whole length? So if I couldn't physically swim because of conditions or I had to walk around dams and whatnot, I made sure they traversed the entire length.
2019 it started, 77 miles swum, which is incredible because that's more than most people do in a lifetime. 2020, 60 miles. 2021, 163.5 miles. That was like the pandemic year. Was that one of the reasons why maybe there was a bit more swimming going on?
I actually did a bold move for myself, and I took a 4-month leave of absence from work for the sole purpose of swimming. And I was actually hoping to do more, but it was a very wet summer. And with rain, depending upon how much, there's combined sewer overflow, which elevates the E. coli level. And so I had to modify my swims. And then there was many swims that got postponed. And it really was a lesson that nature dictates the swim schedule. Planning as best as I can, but it was a hard lesson to learn, but a wonderful lesson. And that really helped an inner transformation for me.
Yeah, because I think some people would probably just think, oh, she did it all in one go, which
It's not impossible, but you self-funded this, you work,
Yeah.
you have other things in your life going on as well. This was never about a race. This was
No.
a journey. And that's the important thing we want to get across is this wasn't about breaking records. This was a personal journey to you. Why was it personal?
I grew up with the love for the water. My father was a ship captain. My mother made sure my brother, sister, and I knew how to swim at a young age. And I literally came into my body and its strength, its versatility, connecting with the world in a watery element. And my body yearned for it. And as I said, I usually swam outdoors, but when I moved to South Hadley in 2013, a lake wasn't readily available. The river was there. I didn't really think about it, and when I actually did get up into the river, I didn't know its history. Every time I explained to people I was swimming in the Connecticut River, they're like, is it clean? And so I did a little history, and back in the 50s, it was so polluted, you couldn't swim in it, and it was known as New England's most scenic sewer, which is really horrible if you think about it.
Yeah, it's interesting that when you talk about that sort of time period of the 50s and 60s, a lot of America's waterways were heavily polluted. We're not far from Long Island Sound, of course, and the Sound was for many years heavily polluted as well. Still has, obviously, an element of pollution, sadly. As human beings are, we're never going to completely eradicate this because we keep coming up with new stuff that we want to throw into the environment. And thankfully, there are people like yourself and organizations that make sure that that gets minimized wherever absolutely possible. But apart from the pollution aspect, you were saying there's the geographical and the geological aspects of it as well. Then, of course, there's the natural stuff that's in the river as well, all the plants and things. There's lots of barriers to this type of endeavor, isn't there?
Yes. Planning logistics was a major challenge. I likely spent 4 times as long planning a swim as I did swimming. And inevitably, I would always plan 2 swims in case the conditions related to the first fell through. I had to monitor E. coli levels and check the water flow rate around the 9 dams along the river, because wherever there are dams, there are water releases, and that impacts how quickly the water is flowing, and that can be dangerous from a swimming perspective. But on that note, also, as I spent more time in the river, I began to be able to hone my ability to modify my swim plans to maximize the river's assist. For instance, there was an 11-mile stretch from Turner's Falls, Massachusetts to Sunderland. That area doesn't have public access except at the top. If the water was flowing slowly, that would roughly be a 3-day outing with canoes, because that area does not allow boats. The conditions, it's too rocky. But because of a water release, I was able to swim that in 2 hours and 8 minutes. My efforts yielded 4 miles, and the river gifted me 7 because of how fast the water was moving. And it was that evening, it was the summer solstice of 2019, that my wife said, I think we need to get a boat for safety reasons. We were safe, but if I needed assistance, she wouldn't have been able to get me and us still make the Sunderland boat ramp. And the next boat ramp was 5 miles downstream in Hatfield.
Safety is such a critical thing, and obviously having a support vessel, because whenever you hear about these endeavors, of course you have to have a support vessel just in case you cramp up or something while you're swimming. So talk to us about that. Was the support vessel or some form of support with you nearly all the time while you were doing this swimming?
Yes. So in the beginning, the first 2 years, it was kayaks. And there are some sections where only car-top vehicles is allowed or accessible because of the river access, that there's only car-top launching spots. There's roughly a 15-mile stretch above Putney, Vermont, near and just below Bellows Falls, where again, there's no public access. So I would drive up to Putney, Vermont, launch the boat. Whoever was able to support me that day we would motor upstream wherever I thought was like 3.5, 4 miles, shorter distances in the beginning of the swim sessions, longer distance later. And then I would swim down to where the finish was that particular day. And then wherever I started, there would be a prominent, either a tree or take a photo. I have a pin. And then the next time I always made sure that I overlapped that. So at any one point, I exited and I also entered it. And other things with safety, down in Connecticut, from Hartford down, I had to take into account the tide schedule. In addition, swimming on weekends was out because of all the big boats and the wave makers for safety reasons. And then a big factor was the tides, because sometimes actually I would time my swims roughly an hour and 15 minutes after high tide to give it a chance to turn so I could take advantage of the river system. One question that I always get is, did I swim upstream? I'm crazy, not stupid.
Exactly. I think even an Olympian would be challenged to do that. I'm looking at some of the photographs which are posted on your website. It looks chilly in some of those photographs. You're wearing, what is it, a wet or a dry suit in this?
There's one, the 5th season I bought a dry suit because I needed to swim the northern section from Colebrook down to Dalton, Vermont. And I wanted to take advantage of the spring snowmelt. So the water was 45, 47 degrees, and the wetsuit that I had was rated for 54 degrees, but I wanted to stay in the water for about 3.5 hours. And so I got a dry suit. It's not easy to swim in, but that's okay. Slow and steady. Again, this was not a race. And each time during the swim, I would have my support team would give me a water bottle with hot water and honey. And that was a lovely treat. But invariably, it would take 10 minutes for my face to get acclimated to the cold water again.
Let's carry on the journey here.
Sure.
We got up to 2021 where we said 163.5 miles, 2022, 37.4 miles, and then finally 2023, the 5th year, 72.1 miles. Talk to us about 2023. It was, as we said, the 5th, the final year. It took almost until the end of 2023 before it was finished.
Mm-hmm.
How did it feel that year, that 2023? Did you know in your head that it was going to be the final year?
No, I was hoping it was, but because of the lessons learned in 2020 and that I wasn't able to swim as much as I thought I would. And at that point, I decided it'll take however long it takes. So the short answer is no, I didn't know.
Now, during the 5-year, should we call it an odyssey as well as a journey? I think that's a nice word as well, isn't it?
It's a delightful word.
Yeah, odyssey and a journey. During that time period, you got contacted by the Connecticut River Conservancy. They heard about what you were doing. Talk to us about that, because you then went on and are still a board trustee member.
So it was in 2018. I was swimming at the Holyoke Y as part of the master swim team, and a friend Lori was doing some consulting work for the Connecticut River Conservancy, and she told them about me, and they asked her to test the waters to see if I would be amenable to partnering with them. And I was. Initially, I was a little nervous in the sense that I'm a very low-key person. I don't like to bring attention to myself. And in addition to the journey or odyssey on the river, as I was mentioning, sort of an inner transformation, it's the idea of reclaiming my voice to speak for the river. And that's how I view myself now as an ambassador for the river, not just as a trustee of the CRC, but my contribution and continued endeavor is to raise awareness about the significance, beauty, and power of the Connecticut River, but also that if we spend enough time Listeners, you don't have to swim the entire length of the river. I needed to do. There are people who've paddled the entire length, but you don't have to. There are multitudes of ways that you can visit. You can sit on its shores and read a book. You can paint, journal. There are boat rides out of the Connecticut River Museum that you can see osprey and eagles, or you can paddle, or you can just take a swim. You can scuba dive or fly fish. The choice is yours, but the more time you spend with it, you will notice, as I did, the nuances of its beauty, but ultimately it will reflect back the significance and power that resides within you.
When 2023 started to round out, the journey, the Odyssey, was coming to an end. It happened in October.
October 15th.
So at what point before that date did you think this is now the end of the journey?
So it was in middle of August. In essence, all of the distance that I still needed to swim up in northern Vermont and northern New Hampshire was completed. And then it was literally, I saved roughly 2.6 miles from the Amtrak Railroad Bridge connecting Old Saybrook Old Lyme out to the Sound as the finale swim. Admittedly, the swim from the bottom of Selden Island to the Baldwin Bridge, I had swam on the tail of Tropical Storm Fred, and Hurricane Henri was 2 days away. So imagine your wipers going like crazy and offering little visibility. People are stopping under highway overpasses to get out of the rainstorm, and your hazard lights are clicking loudly and out of sync with your wipers. That in hopes that nobody crashes into the Boston whaler that you're towing. That's the day that I decided to proceed with my plan to swim 6 miles above I-95 from the Baldwin Bridge near Essex. It might have seemed like a crazy thing to do. However, I swam further than I thought because it was an easier swim as expected. The rain had stopped when I started my swim, but the wind was still a factor. There was 3 to 4 foot waves, but there are a lot of objective water hazards, or a lot of objectives on the water, boat traffic being one of them. And I knew few, if any, boats would be out in that area.
So, Kari, the final day came in October. Talk us through how you felt that day.
There was mixed emotions. I was excited that I would be completing the swim and swimming out to the Sound. And there was also a tinge of sadness because the journey was coming to an end. I was a little caught off guard because, again, to me, it's just swimming, but I also have, since having finished, have really embraced being a spokesperson, and I appreciate the opportunity to share the story today. But it was exciting, and we had a wonderful celebration riverside. Rebecca Todd, who's the executive director of the Connecticut River Conservancy, she was 2 weeks onto the job, and it was wonderful to have her there, as well as Markel Smith, the director of the Friends of Conti, and that recently has been changed to the Connecticut River Watershed Partnership. And it was phenomenal to have people there to celebrate me, to celebrate the river. There was a 94-year-old gentleman who I didn't know, but whose daughter had said he had heard about it and wanted to come. And it was just great because there was a palpable love for the river and the wildlife.
It is something that clearly brought a lot of people together. As you said, you still swim in the river. It's now just over a year since you completed the Odyssey, the journey of becoming the first person to swim the entire 410 miles of the Connecticut River. For people out there listening, if they're looking for something to do maybe in their lives to inspire them, like you said, they don't have to go and do a 410-mile swim. But What would you say to people if they're looking for something, it can be big or small, to make a difference, that they can take that away with them and say, I did that?
Well, I have an acronym called EMBRACE. In addition to embracing the river, but it is to engage in an activity you love. And if you're not sure what that is, think back of what you used to do when you were a child. And maybe there are new hobbies that you want to try. Go for it. And the other is make time. So I'll give you the first two actions for the acronym EMBRACE. One is engage in an activity you love, and M is for make time. Society and life asks us to have an incredibly hectic and busy schedule. We don't have to. And we are ultimately in the driver's seat for the destiny of our lives. And so you get to make the choice. And with this new year, I invite you to leave the word resolution behind. There's nothing wrong with you. And go find what you enjoy and make time to do it.
Kari Kastango, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you, Brian. It's been a pleasure.
And you can find out more about Kari and her Connecticut River swim at her website, Kari Kastango, that's Karikastango.com. And for more information about the Connecticut River and how you can help look after it, head over to the Connecticut River Conservancy website at ctriver.org.
The more you listen to your kids, the closer you'll be. So we asked kids, what do you want your parents to hear?
I feel sometimes that I'm not listened to. I would just want you to listen to me more often and evaluate situations with me and lead me towards success.
Listening is a form of love. Find resources to help you support your kids and their emotional well-being at sounditouttogether.org. That's sounditouttogether.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and Pivotal.
Time now for a look at other stories making the headlines this week. The Connecticut Business and Industry Association says the state's job growth is stuck in a holding pattern. The CBIA, the largest business association in Connecticut, made its comments after the Department of Labor released November job figures in December, recently showing Connecticut had added only 300 jobs that month. Chris DiPentima is the president and CEO of the CBIA and said they've been seeing a repeating pattern in the state now for the last several years.
We have a strong 6-month growth back in 22, back in 23, and again in 24 coming out of the pandemic. But the last 5 months has really stalled on us. Just over 4,000 jobs added over that 5-month period at a time when we have 73,000 job openings. So the job demand is there, but we're not filling those job openings. And when we say it's trapped in a holding pattern, that's supply. It's just stuck and we're not able to get these jobs filled, which in the end is affecting Connecticut's economic growth overall.
DiPentima says factors affecting the workforce in the state is the high cost to live and do business in Connecticut, with energy and healthcare costs being the two biggest challenges.
Housing, childcare, property taxes, income taxes. Healthcare is a big thing. The cost of healthcare for employees who work for employers is very expensive in Connecticut. So these things all add up. And so if you're an individual, older, looking to relocate to a state, younger, looking to stay in a state, you look at those cost of living numbers and it's just not affordable. Even though Connecticut is paying 5th highest wages overall in the country, my take home is so much more less because of the cost of living.
Connecticut's minimum wage will increase in January to $16.35 an hour, making it the highest minimum wage of all the New England states. However, living wage surveys show an individual needs to earn closer to $25 per hour to be able to live comfortably in Connecticut. Nursing staff at Bacchus Hospital in Norwich, Connecticut are continuing their legal challenge against hospital owner Hartford Healthcare over their refusal to adhere to state laws and mandatory overtime. Bacchus Federation of Nurses, AFT Local 5149, filed an injunction back in October 2024 against the hospital, citing new Connecticut laws prohibiting nurses from working more than a 12-hour shift in a 24-hour period. Heather Brouth is one of the affected nurses and treasurer of the local union and says the situation is at a stalemate.
So not changing anything and continuing to do it the way that they're doing, it's kind of a catch-22, because if they change, do they admit wrongdoing? And when they don't change, they're still not following the law. So either way, they're not doing right by the staff or the patients, unfortunately. And that's really all we've been asking for from day one, is to just help us keep one another safe and keep the patients safe. Because if we're not operating at 100%, we're not giving the patients 100%, and that's all they deserve.
Hartford Healthcare, in the meantime, has requested the case to be transferred from state to federal court, challenging the legitimacy of the union's claims and whether Connecticut's new laws have standing. Eric Chester is the lawyer for the nurses' union and says they never wanted this matter going to court.
Our state legislature enacted a very straightforward law restricting mandatory overtime for nurses with the intent on improving patient safety, reducing medical errors that could come as a result of exhausted, overextended nurses caring for patients. Now, the union brought this after repeated efforts to try to get the hospital to comply with the law voluntarily, and unfortunately they didn't.
Hartford Healthcare have also asked the federal court to dismiss the nurses' union's case. A new House bill called the Hearts Act of 2024, signed into law by President Biden, could help save thousands of school children across the nation from dying with undiagnosed cardiomyopathy. The condition is a rare and chronic disease of the heart muscle and can be fatal. Lisa Yu is the founder of the non-profit, the Children's Cardiomyopathy Foundation, that helped get the bill through. She lost both her sons to the disease.
My first son died of a sudden cardiac arrest. He was undiagnosed. So again, this bill is very personal to me. Too often we hear about in the news healthy young athletes, or they don't necessarily have to be an athlete, but they die suddenly and they don't know what the cause is. And they realize later on that it is cardiomyopathy. And sometimes they realize that there's actually a family history of cardiomyopathy.
The new bill will establish a series of programs and educational materials that will be sent to schools, allowing them to better understand the condition and look for its symptoms, as well as train staff on the use of CPR and life-saving defibrillation machines to be used in the event of a child's cardiac arrest.
Should something happen at school and a child has a sudden cardiac arrest, is the school prepared? So the other components of the bill is to ensure that school professionals are trained in CPR and the usage of AEDs, which automatic external defibrillators, and that the school has a cardiac emergency plan in place so that they are able to react quickly and save that child that does have a cardiac arrest at school or during sports practice.
It's believed around 30,000 young people are diagnosed with a form of cardiomyopathy each year in the United States. Details about the new bill and cardiomyopathy can be found at childrenscardiomyopathy.org. And Connecticut continues to remember the late President Jimmy Carter, who died at the age of 100 on December 29, 2024. President Carter is remembered in the state as a Navy lieutenant in the submarine service and was based at Subbase New London during his naval career. He was also responsible for saving the subbase decades later when he became president, when the Pentagon was looking to close the Groton facility down. After his one term as president, Carter later went on to become the face of the non-profit organization Habitat for Humanity, and regularly was seen helping to build homes for American families. Carter's wife, Rosalind Carter, died just over a year ago in November 2023 at the age of 96. The Carters leave behind 3 sons and 1 daughter, as well as 11 grandchildren and 14 great-grandchildren. That's all from us for this edition. Do send us your questions and story ideas to the show via our website at connecticut-east.com or Facebook or Twitter at Connecticut East and on Instagram at Connecticut East This Week. And you can listen to the show again on our social platforms, on demand, and by asking your smart speaker to play Connecticut East This Week podcast. And please like, follow, and share on your social media too. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thank you for listening.